With factoring the greatest common factor, the first thing we want to do is find the common factor. So looking at this example, start by looking at your coefficients. You have a 1, 8, and an 8. Well, 1 is the only number that they all have in common, so we don't write 1. Then look at your letters. You have a v cubed, a v squared, and a v. All of them have at least 1. Well, basically think of it this way. Since they all have a v, which one has the smallest exponent? And that would be 1. So v would be your common vector. Now we're going to take each of these terms and divide it by that v. Notice I also put the v out in front of parentheses. Now just go through and simplify each fraction. V cubed divided by v would be v squared. V squared divided by v would be v. And then v divided by v cancels, so that's just plus 8. If you look in your parentheses, you'll notice we don't have common factors with all three of them in here anymore. Also notice I put my common factor in my final answer still. Don't forget to include that. Another red flag you can check for is you shouldn't have fractions in your final answer. So if you still got a common factor in the parentheses, or if you have fractions, then your greatest common factor is wrong. You need to look at that again. And one other thing you can notice is I started out with 3 terms. I have 3 terms in my parentheses. It should work that way every time. Okay, with this next example, we're going to again try to find the greatest common factor. So if you look at your coefficients, you have a -8, -4, and -1. Other than 1, nothing will go into all those numbers, but they do all have a negative. So we'll put a negative. Then let's check our letters. We have Q. All of them have at least one Q. The smallest exponent is 1. So we'll just do Q. Then they don't all have a P, and they don't all have an R. So negative Q is your greatest common factor. Now we're going to divide each of these by negative Q. So we keep negative Q. So right here, 3 minus 1 is 2. Notice our negatives cancel. So 8Q squared, P to the 5th R, plus 4Q squared, P squared. And then anything divided by itself is 1. So this would be plus 1. Be careful not to cancel that term out completely. Notice all of our negative signs changed to positives. Also, again, notice we don't have common factors in the parentheses anymore. And also notice we started with 3 terms, so there's 3 terms in the parentheses. Okay, with this next example, again, look at the coefficients, -10, -12, 6. Those are all 3 divisible by 2. Now let's look at the letters. To start with M. We have an M squared and M cubed, but that one doesn't have an M. So let's go on to N. N squared, N squared, N squared. So they all have an N squared. So that's part of your common factor. And then P, only this first one has a P, so we don't include it. So now let's divide everything by our common factor. Alright, and now let's simplify each of our fractions. So -10 divided by 2 would be -5. M squared, the N squareds cancel, then a P to the 4th. For the next term, negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. The n squareds cancel again. You have an m cubed. Then for the last term, 6 divided by 2 is 3. And again, the n squareds cancel. So that's your final answer.